Welcome, Nixa voters. We're doing our first big live stream here for the city of Nixa. We're doing a Nixa Live. We're going to be taking questions today all about the April 4th election that's coming up. On April 4th, you guys will be deciding whether to provide extra funding to the Nixa Police Department that would come from a proposed 3/4 cent increase to the general sales tax. We have some questions that have been submitted already to us, and we'll be taking some more during the live stream. So if you've got questions or you just want to learn more about the issues so you can make an informed decision when you go to the polls on April 4th, stay tuned. We'll have a lot more information coming up in just a second. And we want to thank everybody who for joining us today, whether you're watching it live or whether you're watching this recorded after the fact. Thank you for being here. Thank you for watching, and thank you for participating and being an informed voter. It's really important for democracy to work at the local level for folks to get information and be able to make informed decisions. So we appreciate that. Just a little bit so you understand how things are going to work today. We had some questions that were submitted to us ahead of time via email. We'll be asking some of those, and we also have some questions that we'll be taking from you guys as you submit those in the live stream. Just add those in the comments below the stream on Facebook, either on the city's page or the police department's page on Facebook, and we'll be trying to get to some of those as we go through the course of the thing today. And if we don't get to your question today, be sure to stay tuned at watching the comment section below these videos as they stay up. We'll be trying to answer some of those questions with written answers over the next few days. And also we have a page on the website at nixa.com/elections where you can get to an article all about this issue. And we actually have an FAQ where we've written out some pretty thorough answers to several questions on there. You can review that. And also on that page, you can get to other information. We have some other ballot issues coming up on April 4th that you'll be deciding. Specifically, there's 3 other things that are not tax related, but they are proposed updates to the city's home rule charter. And so we're not really going to go into those issues today during this live stream, but we will be educating you more about that stuff over the coming days and weeks before we get to the election. And of course, you can learn more about that at nixa.com/elections. But for now, I want to introduce you guys to Jimmy Liles. He's the city administrator for the city, which means he oversees the day-to-day operations of the city and all of its departments. And he's been with the city for over 20 years. And it's actually our former chief of police here at the city of Nixa. And then I want to introduce you also to Joe Campbell. He's our current chief of police. And he's also been with the city for over 20 years and works his way up from a patrol officer up to chief of police. And so, Chief, I'm going to throw you the first question today, which is, what's your biggest concern related to not having enough officers? You know, we talk a little bit about needing about 53, in the ballpark of 53 officers for the number of calls for service that we get. But we only have 42 full-time officers at right now. So what does that lead to? What are the big concerns that you have that come out of that?
Yeah, that's a great question, Drew. I will tell you that one of the things that keeps me up at night as a chief of police, and I've said this in many other situations and when we've talked about this, is that, you know, whenever you have insufficient staffing, you really have that situation where you have to stretch your people. And, you know, whenever we're having to, you know, have people denied time off, for example, or we black out days, which means we don't allow people, any line level staff member off that day because of something going on. Maybe it's a big event or some other kind of training or something. It really puts a strain on that individual officer. We're asking them to do overtime to meet the standards for our minimum staffing. And, you know, that leads to burnout, honestly. And so we're working our guys harder than ever. Our city is growing. It's always been growing, and we're always in a situation where we're trying to keep up. And, you know, to keep up and to provide that quality service right now, we're just stretching our employees. And that burnout is a serious issue.
Yeah, it's competitive with other departments, right? Pay is kind of competitive right now with some other departments, but if officers start to feel like they're getting burned out here, they can start to look for work in other departments, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. You know, right now is a real tough time, honestly, to bring people into the law enforcement profession. You know, the climate's not great, but we do have very dedicated people that are working for us. But you know, those people, as they go through their course of their career, if they can look at another place and say, well, maybe I can go there and not work as hard or the demands won't be as high on me at another location. They can certainly, move their career to a different agency potentially. And so retention's an issue, and so we have to be cognizant of that as well.
And Jimmy, another common question people ask is how much revenue would, if the 3/4 sales tax is approved on April 4th, how much revenue would that create for the city? And how much of that would go towards the police department?
Yeah, great question. If the public approves a 3/4 sales tax, it would generate approximately about $3.1 million a year. And that's based off of last year's numbers off of the prior year. So that's kind of what we would judge the following year off of. And your second part of the question, Drew, is 100% of that will go to the police department. This is a general sales tax, but it is dedicated for public safety, which is dedicated to our police department specifically. So 100% of that 3/4 would go to the police department.
Why ask for police funding so soon after the November election? We had a tax proposal in November, and voters said no on that. So why bring this issue again so quickly after that last election?
Well, it really comes down to public safety. That's one of our number one priorities for our community. We're constantly named one of the safest communities in the state year after year, and we want to maintain that. Our citizens have got a level of service that we're very proud of, and we want to be able to maintain that level of service that we've been able to provide and ensure that we have a safe community. That's one of the big reasons why people move to Nixa, is because this is such a safe place to raise your family. And, when visiting with council and the mayor, we felt that, we wanted to make sure that public safety stayed one of our top priorities. And so that's why we're coming back so quickly, is because, as you mentioned earlier, we need more officers. And the fact is, over the last 3 years, we've not been able to afford to hire any additional officers. And, over time, that's going to have an effect on our community. And so we want to make sure that we stay ahead of that. And so that's why we're bringing it back so quickly.
And another one of the issues, apart from just having enough officers, is the need for a bigger police headquarters. You guys have really outgrown your space, and we actually shot some interviews earlier last week with some of the officers in the department to explain some of the issues that they're having with the limited space at the current headquarters. So first, we want to hear a little bit from Detective Young, and she is going to talk a little bit about her role in needing to have an appropriate room to interview victims of crimes.
Hi, I'm Noelle Young. I'm a detective with the Nixa Police Department. I've been with the city of Nixa for a little over 2 years. So one of the things that I love about my job is the work that I do with victims. I get to give people an opportunity to tell their story, and I get to help them navigate the criminal justice process and advocate for them. So part of my job as a detective is to interview those victims. And I do that right here in our interview room on the lobby. So this interview room has big windows, and like I said, it's attached to the lobby. So anyone that's out here can see and hear a victim while they're telling me about often a very painful and difficult experience that they've been through. So what we're needing instead is a room that gives victims privacy and safety, and somewhere that they're comfortable talking about what has happened to them. And that is one of the reasons that the city of Nixa is asking for the funds to build a new police department, because the building we have right now does not accommodate what we're needing.
So it's a good point that she brings up there about the need for an appropriate space to have those really sensitive interviews that have to happen with victims of crime. The department was built about when, and because we've remodeled it several times, and we've tried to kind of make it work for us for quite a while. It's just we're just bursting at the seams, right?
Yeah, like you said earlier, I've been here 20 years, and we worked out of that same building in all those 20 years. And we've seen a couple of expansions. We've added on to that building over the years as we've tried to keep up with the growth. But frankly, you know, the community's growing, our department had to grow, and our building hasn't grown with us. You know, we found out that we're about half the size that we need to be. And, you know, that makes it really tight for the officers and the staff whenever you're using about half of the space that you need. I mean, we literally have people working out of what once were closets as offices.
Yeah.
You know, and with that, you know, that building, we took a long, hard look at that building, and we looked at it and said, what can we do to make this building work? And, you know, through talking to some engineers and architects, we found out that there's not much more expansion that we can do with this building. We're kind of locked in place because of some water issues, and we certainly can't build upward. And so, you know, I think the useful life of this building, I just think we're kind of near the end of it.
And we have a couple questions that we've already gotten from Facebook from Deborah. So I'm going to throw those to you here, Chief. So the first one is, what is the retention rate for officers? How I guess she's kind of asking what the turnover rate is. How often are we losing officers, and how long is it taking us to hire or to fill in those current positions?
Yeah, and you know, retention has always been an issue, honestly. I can tell you that in my 20 years, I think I can count on my hand about 6 months where we were fully staffed with every single position filled. And there's a variety of reasons for that. You know, sometimes we weren't hiring because we weren't allowed to hire because of the budget. Sometimes we were having some issues, you know, getting good quality candidates. And then sometimes, you know, we just lose people because in this day and age, honestly, people are coming into law enforcement. They're trying it out. They're seeing how it works for their life, their family. Can they afford to live on the salary, those kinds of things. And then they're kind of migrating away into doing other things. And so, you know, for our retention rate, you know, we do see a little bit of turnover. A lot of times, recently, we're seeing people just leaving the profession in general.
Yeah. And Deborah also had another question that she submitted over Facebook, which is, do we plan to use any of the funding for body cameras?
Body cameras. Yeah, that's something that we could certainly look at in the future, and it's been it's been on our long-term plan for quite a while, you know. But the reality is, body cameras are very expensive. When you start looking at the amount of money that you're going to spend on storage, and then the technology to bring the cameras online, and then the expectation to keep that technology up, it becomes very, very expensive. And to be honest with you, as a chief, I have to prioritize how we spend our money in the department, you know, and things like police cars and other types of equipment, they just rise to the top, frankly. But we're not opposed to body cameras. I certainly think they have a good place in law enforcement, and I don't think any of our officers would say anything different as well.
Interesting. You're talking about, because to save that stuff as evidence, you have to keep all that video recording 24 hours a set, 24/7, every day of the year from so many officers on some kind of server. So you're talking about a lot of server space.
Yeah, if you think about it, a body camera runs 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, because we have officers on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, all year long. And so that's a massive amount of data. And, you know, you do have some retention things that you have to keep track of, and, you know, certain types of things that are recorded have to be kept longer. But, you know, those storage issues, they can become very costly. And the cameras themselves, frankly, can be expensive.
Yeah. I want to remind folks that you can submit your questions via Facebook, and we're going to try to get to more of those as we go through the course of the stream. We also have more questions we're going to try to get to that were submitted ahead of time. But right now I want to pivot to another one of those videos where we interviewed another officer about the needs for space in the headquarters building. This one's going to be with Sergeant Utzler, who oversees evidence storage. It kind of ties into this, and the physical evidence from crime scenes and things like that. And he talks a little bit about the fact that we've really outgrown our evidence storage capabilities. Please take a look at this.
Hi, I'm Richard Utzler, a support services sergeant here with the Nixa Police Department. I've been with the Nixa Police Department for 10 years, in law enforcement just over 26 years. Part of my daily duties here at the police department is the oversight of the evidence room. We're facing a huge problem with our evidence room, and that is simply we're out of space. We are busting at the seams. Currently, we have to hold evidence for up to 50 years for high-profile cases, and that causes a big problem for us. With us busting at the seams, we have to house evidence in other locations in city buildings here in Nixa. One of those locations is here in the basement of one of our city buildings. And with this building, we have a problem. Every time it rains, this building floods. With the flooding, that brings another problem. Some of our evidence could be damaged, and we could lose a criminal case, and that is simply unacceptable. The city has asked for a funding proposal to build us a new headquarters, and with that headquarters, we'll get a brand new evidence room, and that will solve our problems. Thank you.
So yeah, as Sergeant Usler has said, we've outgrown the storage, evidence storage area inside the police department building so much that we've expanded to 4 other buildings around town. And there are some issues regarding security, their ability to kind of keep that evidence in a proper way. So we really need to resolve that, right, Chief?
Oh yeah, you know, evidence is one of our major concerns, quite frankly. You know, you keep high value items in there, and you know, and the other thing, you know, there's some things like drugs and firearms and things of that nature. You know, those are things that really need to be centralized and protected. You can't just rent some storage space over at U-Store and throw those things in there. You know, those are the kinds of things that have to be protected. You know, and having a proper evidence room is going to help us do that. You know, for us, evidence handling and proper procedures and storage. You know, whether it's with the drugs, money, guns, anything like that. There's protocols for that. You know, we're trying to meet best practices the best we can with what we have. But that's really sometimes very difficult to do when you don't have the space to separate things out properly.
We have a question coming in over Facebook from Bryce. He asks, will the funding be used for anything other than police, Jimmy?
Yeah. So the 3/4 cent sales tax is passed. 100% of that will be used for the police. This is, as I mentioned earlier, this is a general sales tax, but it is dedicated solely for public safety. And of course, we define public safety as our police department. So 100% of this will be utilized for the police department.
And how much does and kind of dovetails to my next question here that we had emailed in before, which was how much money does the police department spend currently? The number for last year was around 4.6. Is that right?
About
4.3 million.
Yeah.
And how does that compare with the revenue that we get from our current 1 cent general sales tax?
Well, I can take that one, Drew. I think, as mentioned, operations for the police department alone ran about $4.3 million last year. And, if you look at how much revenue we brought in just on the general sales tax, we brought in about 3.6 million. So you can obviously see that we're obviously spending more than we're bringing in on our general sales tax. So when you look at those numbers, you can't continue to operate in that manner. You have to be able to offset those expenses. And so again, that's one of the reasons that we're going to the public to talk about this 3/4 cent.
Yeah. And how much does it cost to employ each officer is another question. And I think we have a graphic that kind of explains that as well. What does it take to add each additional officer to the force?
Yeah, I mean, for us, when we did that rough calculation, we're at about $122,000 all in on an officer. And that includes their salary, their benefits, training, uniforms, and then we also include things like, a patrol car. So for every 2 officers, you want to have a patrol unit, a marked unit for those people to get out and, do those activities. But, I think it's important to note when you talk about the police budget is that the vast majority of our budget is salary and benefits. And so when we go through on an annual basis and we look at our budget, I mean, we're running pretty lean, to be honest with you. There's just not a lot of fat there. The police force is, again, mostly salary benefits. And then, we do spend money on other things like equipment and cars. But we've tried to really reduce costs in every area. For example, one of the things that we did is we stopped buying police cars outright and we started leasing them. That was a cost-saving measure. We were able to put a lot of nice newer cars and get rid of some junk that we were driving.
You guys were replacing engines and transmissions?
Oh,
and
yeah,
everything.
we were having a ton of problems because we were running these cars way too long, and so you're talking about major mechanical failures. But the lease program was a way for us to put, new vehicles on the road in an economical way that saves us money in the long run, for a variety of reasons. So, although that number may seem big, when you start really looking at it, we have done a lot to try to keep, our costs down. We spend money where it's appropriate, but I certainly would tell you that, as a person who lives and works in this community, I'm cognizant of how I spend the taxpayers' money.
Yeah, it takes a lot of staff to get the job done. Yeah, it adds up fast. And another question we get a lot is, how do we know how many officers we need? Because we've already talked about that a little bit today, of the, and you might talk about that calculation of saying, how do we get to that number of, we need about 53, and we're at about 42 right now, and we might need about 80 by 2040, in the next 20 years.
Yeah, so if you just look at Nixa in general and you go, we know that Nixa grows, okay? It's been growing. I've been here 20 years. It's never not grown. And so, with that growth, we have to keep up, right? And that's
We've
what
actually doubled in size over the last 20 years.
Sure, absolutely, and we're trying to keep up with that. A real rough way to do it, you could just look at the Department of Justice. They put out some statistics about officers per 1,000, and right now they're saying in the Midwest you should have about 2.2 officers per 1,000. And you do that rough calculation, it gives you the number of officers you need for a city of our size, which is almost 25,000. Additionally, we do staffing studies, and so we look at officers' time and things of that nature, and we decide how much proactive and reactive time we want officers to have so that they could go out and deter crime and things of that nature. And so those are the kinds of things that help us determine how many officers we need. And then the final piece of that is just having minimum staffing requirements. And right now, our minimum staffing requirement is just 4 officers. So we require 4 officers per shift right now. And you think, wow, that doesn't seem like a lot. And really it isn't, to be quite honest with you. And I'll use this example. On a typical day at any given time, there could be an accident in Nixa. We have a lot of traffic here. And so that accident might take 2 officers. And if I have 4 officers working, that means I have 2 available for calls for service. And let's say a person calls in and they need some type of assistance with, a report about, lost or stolen property. So then that officer's tied up. And now another call comes out about a domestic dispute. Well, that's a 2-officer job, right? We know that those are some of the most dangerous calls that go on. But I only have 1 officer left. So you can see within that short amount of time, 4 officers can be dispatched and be tied up very quickly. And so we try not to work on minimum staffing, and that's because that, frankly, it's an officer safety issue. Yeah. I know that a few people I've heard, some people say, well, we see Nixa police officers all the time. Every time I drive through town, I see a lot of officers. And I'm actually very proud of that fact because that's by design. We are a proactive agency and we want visibility. I ask my officers to be out there, be visible, because that in and of itself deters crime. But those officers, they may seem like they're idly sitting by, but we do request that they write their reports and take phone calls and make contacts with people from their patrol vehicle. And so just because you might see a person sitting doesn't mean they're just idling. And then the other thing is, we have 2 major corridors in our city. And, so if you're driving down 160 and 14, there's a real good chance you're going to see probably more than 1 officer because those are our major travel routes to get everywhere else within the city limits.
One of the things that we're really proud of at the city of Nixa is that we continue to be rated one of the safest cities in Missouri. And I think that a lot of that comes from the work that your officers do, but also the training that we invest in for them. And we send our officers not only to all the mandatory training they have to go to, but we try to send them to above and beyond the minimum staffing, the minimum training, so they really have the equipment and the knowledge to be able to do their job at a really high level. And we have a corporal who's actually dedicated to helping coordinate the training for all of our officers in our department, and that's Corporal Acox. And I want to throw to a video where we interviewed, stumbling over my words there. We interviewed Corporal Acox last week a little bit about the multi-purpose room that we have at the police department, and how when he needs to use it for training, sometimes there are conflicts because we have meetings going on in there or briefings. There's just a lot of that room is used for. So take a listen to this from Corporal Acox.
I'm Dennis Acox. I'm a corporal here at the Nixa Police Department, where I've been employed for about 10.5 years. Currently assigned as the training officer for the department. We're in the training room, and it's really become more of a multi-purpose room. This room is used for all of our in-service training, where we train our officers every other month for about 12 hours. It's also used as a briefing room twice a day. It's used for an in-house academy, where we run our new hires through a 4-week in-house academy. We use this room about 85% of the time for that. In addition to that, we use it for a community room. We have a program called the Citizens Police Academy, where we'll run 20 students through that, and that occurs every week for a few months. There is a lot of tearing this room down, picking it back up, taking tables down, taking chairs down, putting mats out for defense tactics, and then having to redo that at the end of the day so they can get to briefing. Definitely a lot of times meetings have to be relocated because it's been a really busy room. And I've seen us have to do a squad briefing out in the squad room, for example, because there's a meeting or there's training going on in here. So a new facility would give us a lot more opportunities to have specialized rooms for each one. So a lecture room maybe, and a computer room, and a defense tactics room, to where we could just leave those things set up and just move on. That's why a new building would be very beneficial for the police department.
So yeah, as Corporal Acox said, that room is really it's always booked, and we really need some more kind of dedicated spaces for different things at the new police department. What do you kind of have planned, or because we don't have a lockdown final plan for the building. It's still kind of a concept. The renderings that people have seen and the floor plans are still kind of a concept phase. But what do we have kind of roughly planned as far as some of those dedicated spaces that we would have in a new police department?
Yeah, Drew, when we went through the exercise of, development or planning on the police department, we knew the number of square footage we needed to attain. And then, the details are still to be worked out. But I can tell you that taking that one multi-purpose space and kind of splitting it out so that some things can kind of happen at the same time, or consecutively, we should be able to have a briefing and a training at the same time and not have to overlap that. And so the idea would be to have some separate rooms that you can have multiple things going on. And it really it's about efficiency, honestly, and it gives us the ability to kind of do some things all at the same time instead of having to schedule in on that one particular room, and make it work for, sometimes it's quadruple booked, to be honest with you. So it's a very well-used space, but an overused space.
And Jimmy, we've got a question here from Bryce on Facebook. He's asking for clarification. I don't think folks believe us when we say that 100% of the money from this increase would go to the police department. And they're asking, is there something else that falls under public safety, or that this money would get squirreled away to something else? And does this money, is this kind of a new fund of money to fund the police department, and then all the other money that they're currently using will be freed up for other things? Can you kind of explain those things for
absolutely.
folks?
As I mentioned before, this is dedicated to public safety, and public safety is the police department. So this 3/4 cent, if passed, approximately $3.1 million will be solely utilized for the police department from here forward. Now, it still costs the same amount of money to run the police department that it has the last year, right? So as we mentioned earlier, it ran about $4.3 million in operations last year. Well, we still have to fund that. We're not going to cut operations, right? So we're still got to continue funding the operations at $4.3 million, but then we're also going to have to be able to, if it passes, we're going to be able to utilize this money to hire additional officers. As we mentioned, we need those officers, and obviously that's going to take some time to do and get hired and trained, and also to make payments on a bond issue, because if we do build a new police department, we're going to have to bond that police department out. And we're looking at about a 20-year bond in order to do that. Because again, we always plan for the future, and I'm a big believer in planning for the future, not just meeting our needs today, but what do we need to do to meet our needs in the next 10, 15, 20 years. And so that's how we've planned this police department, and we designed it in a manner to which that it does meet that. So in essence, we are going to continue to fund the $4.3 million that we've already had to do for operations. Plus, we're going to be able to then utilize the money, if passed, to hire the additional officers that we need and to build.
It's covered new expenses.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I think we have a graphic that shows this math. If we can pull that up, it kind of shows how I think we might have shown it earlier in the broadcast. There we go. Where it shows our revenue, 3.6 million is what we currently get from the existing 1% general sales tax last year, and 3.1 million is what we estimate we would have gotten if the 0.75% that we were proposing had already been in place. That's how much we would have gotten. So that would have added up to $6.7 million in combined revenue. And expenses, you look at the 4.3 million we spent last year just on operations alone. That doesn't include CIP projects like we had to build a new police range. That was on top of those operational costs. And then you talk about $1 million estimated was what it would cost for bond payments each year on for 20 years on a building, plus 1.3 million is what it would cost roughly to get about 11 officers on the staff. And then you still got to work in it built into this equation, not built in the cost of rising cost of inflation. The salaries are going to have to rise to keep up with inflation. The cost of maintaining that building, all those things. So really quickly, you start to see that the revenue we would have total balances out with the expenditures that we're going to be having.
And Drew, it's a maybe a good time to mention too that because I get the question all the time, why 0.75%?
Mm-hmm.
Why did we not ask for 0.5 cent?
Yeah.
And so I think that those numbers showed that and by the time if you did a 0.5 cent, we would estimate that closer to around $2 million a year. Well, you can see by the graph that we showed, just the number of officers that we need and the building payments would be more than that $2 million. So this is literally the least amount that we can ask for to be able to meet our needs that we currently have.
We have another question from folks that a lot of folks want to know, how much is this going to cost them? It's 75 cents on a qualifying $100 purchase, right? So if this issue is passed by voters on April 4th, there'd be an additional 75 cents that you'd be charged on a $100 purchase.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note, Drew, that one of the reasons that we went with the sales tax is because we know that people who don't live in the city utilize our service.
Yeah.
And so what I mean by that is, we're answering calls for service for people who are transient, they're moving in and out of Nixa, and so we know to put the burden solely on just the residents of Nixa, it really, honestly, it's not really fair, to be honest, and so when you look at a sales tax, that everybody who comes in and goes from Nixa is going to be paying that tax, and so they're going to be supporting this effort of public safety and the services that we're providing to everybody, quite frankly.
Yeah. Jimmy, could you talk maybe a little bit about, and I think we have a graphic for this as well, about the current sales tax in Nixa and kind of breaking that down and what are the component pieces of the sales tax that currently exists in Nixa?
Sure. Our current sales tax rate, if you purchase something inside the city of Nixa, is 7.475%. And, I think it's important that people understand how that is broken down because the city of Nixa doesn't receive a full 7.475%. We only receive 1.5% of that. The rest of that's divided out between E911, Christian County, and the state of Missouri. So if you look at just the city of Nixa's portion, the 1.5%, 0.5% of that is dedicated to transportation. So that's how we fund our street projects and handle our maintenance for our streets that you have in the city. So really that leaves 1% of the general sales tax that then is funding our general fund that, which our police services are paid from, amongst other things. I mean, we have other things that come out of that same revenue, not just the police, but you also have parks, you have, human resources, finance, administration, and many other departments all, take a piece of that pie, so to speak.
HR, yeah. The police department needs HR and finance department. They handle those things behind the scenes that support the police department as general government services. And I think another question we get that's kind of connected to this is, what about property tax? Why not ask for a property tax instead of a sales tax? And and we also get the question, don't you guys get a lot of property tax revenue? Maybe talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, that's a good question. And Chief kind of brushed that subject a little bit already, and whenever you look at property tax, you're really putting the entire burden on the citizens inside the city of Nixa. Whenever you do a sales tax, other people are helping pay for that. They come into our city. So for example, you may have someone drive here from another community and need our police services. Well, this is an opportunity for those that shop here to help pay for those same services that they're using. It's not putting the entire burden just on the citizens of our community. And then the second part of the question there, Drew, was, how much of that property tax does the city of Nixa receive? We receive approximately 5%, so in comparison, it's a very small portion. Although we do receive that, it's not as large, I think, as a lot of people think that it is.
We really depend on that sales tax as our biggest revenue source.
It really is.
And we have another question that some folks have asked us, is why not focus on economic development? Why can't we just get Target or some other big box store to build a store down here and generate some more sales tax revenue and solve all our problems, right?
Sure. Trust me, we do. We focus a lot on economic development. That is, we spend a lot of time, energy, and effort on bringing businesses in. We want more commercial development. We want more industrial. We want more jobs. We want all those things. And we have a lot of things in place to help bring those things into our community. So it is something that we're totally focused on. And, we partner with other organizations as well to help us do that. We partner with the Nixa Chamber of Commerce to help grow our local businesses. We also partner with Show Me Christian County, which is the economic development organization for our county. So we are working constantly with those groups, and we reach out to potential people to have them businesses come into our community. But, there are a lot of challenges that come along with that. There's a lot of things that, those big box stores, for example, they look at, and everything from population to traffic counts to land availability, all those things factor in. And we are focused on that 100%.
And some of the things that they want to be in a community where it's a safe community too. So investing in the police department is one factor out of many that contributes to creating an environment where places want to invest for their business, right? Have we got any other questions that have come in via Facebook yet? All right. Well, you guys be sure to ask us questions. We wanted to offer this live stream as kind of an alternative to having an in-person meeting, because we know how hard it is to find a good time that works for everybody. Everybody's schedules are different. And so we wanted to offer this as an online thing so that folks could submit questions ahead of time, during, and then folks can even watch it afterwards and still kind of get this information. And hopefully you guys are finding this useful. But feel free to throw more questions into the comments, and we'd love to get to those. But for now, we're just going to kind of keep rolling with some of the questions that were submitted ahead of time. So will all this, we've already covered that. Will all this money go to the police department? Yes. I think we've covered that sufficiently. Yes, 100%, every penny of the sales tax increase would go to the police department. Is there any other money that the city already has that it could be using to cover the costs of more officers and expanding the headquarters?
Yeah, good question. Because that's one thing we get asked all the time, and I think that it really comes down to maybe an understanding of how the finances in municipal government work, and I think we have a graphic for that as well, where we talk a little bit about pies, and we're going to use a pie as an example. If you look at our finances as three different pies, and you have one pie with transportation fund, which we talked about earlier, that half cent that we currently have on our sales tax. That's how our transportation is primarily funded. Then you have the general fund, and then you have our enterprise funds. The enterprise funds are those funds that are like your water, your wastewater, your electric, recycling, things of that nature. Those enterprise funds are funded from those fees. So when you pay your electric bill, that's how the electric fund is actually funded.
And we can't take that money to go pay the police officers.
Right. We're not allowed to take that money from that fund and then use that to hire an additional officer. That money has to stay within that fund. So although
that's a legal requirement, it's not just us. Because how we like it that way. Yeah.
It's not because we don't want to or can't. We just can't. It's not allowed. You're not allowed to do that. So really, that just leaves us primarily with our general fund. As we mentioned earlier, it's primarily made up of sales tax with some other things like our franchise fees and some other things like that.
We're getting a lot of grant funding. Police department actually gets quite a bit of grant funding.
We are constantly looking for grants. You know, and the police department's one of the best departments that when it comes to grant finding, you know, because we want to maximize every tax dollar that we have to its fullest. And so we look for matching grants all the time. We look for grants to help fund training and additional officers, anything that we can find to help us offset those expenses. We're always looking for it.
But yeah, that general fund pie, that's the only pie that police department can eat from.
That's
They
right.
can't touch those other
Yeah,
two
we
pies.
can't use transportation funds for the police. We can't use the enterprise funds to hire officers. So really, it comes from that general fund. And as we mentioned earlier, there's a lot of different departments that eat from that same pie.
Yeah. And then kind of the next piece here is we've talked about this a little bit, is the biggest revenue contributor to that pie is the current 1 cent general sales tax, and it contributed about 3.6 million last year. But the largest slice of that pie that goes out is going to the police department, and it's to the tune of 4.3 billion or million, not billion, million. So we're kind of, as we talked about a little bit earlier, we're kind of upside down. That's not a real good sustainable situation to be in, where our largest revenue source is quite a bit smaller than our largest expenditure.
Yeah, we cannot continue to spend more than we bring in. That's just basic economics. You can't do that, you know. So we have to find a revenue source, because we get asked all the time, you know, can you cut more? You know, we do every year in essence. You know, I can tell you, as I mentioned earlier, for the last 3 years in a row, the chief has asked for more officers, and we've not been able to afford a single additional officer. It's just not affordable. We've had other departments that need additional revenues or additional personnel and different needs that I've just, as much as I know we need them, I've had to say no, because again, we're tightening our belts as tight as we can get them. And, you know, one of the things that I feel that the city of Nixa has done is we've done a really good job for many years doing more with less. And, you know, we do that every single year, and because we want to be the best community, we want to offer all the services that we can to our citizens. And, you know, we're just getting to that tipping point to where we've continued to offer more and more and more with less and less. And we just cannot continue to do that at that rate. It's just not sustainable.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right on spot on there, Jimmy. And I think the thing that will point that out is that, you know, we haven't had an increase in the sales tax since 1987. And so for all those years, we've been essentially working off the same rate.
Yeah.
You know, now the city has grown. I think that's a valid point. But the reality is we have not gone to the public and asked them for an increase, you know, in all those years, you know. And, you know, quite frankly, for my department, we just haven't been able to keep up. And, you know, we've tried, I think, you know, and I think the council has done, you know, they've done their best to do that. But when you have the rapid growth that we have, it's really difficult for a city to keep up with that. And I think it's just, sometimes you turn around, you look around, you go, wait, wow, we're really behind because we weren't able to keep up. But we were really trying to do a lot of things at once, trying to address a lot of issues at once. And then, you know, unfortunately, sometimes one thing has to shrivel for another thing to thrive, you know, in municipal government.
Yeah, our sales tax revenues go up, but they go up at a really low general kind of incline, whereas the cost of doing business is going up like this. And so there's this delta growing between where our revenues are at and what the cost of doing business is. And I think another really interesting point that this ties into is, I think we have another graphic for this as well, which is how our sales tax compares to some other communities and where it would be if it's approved on April 4th. So currently our rate that's coming to the city is 1.5%. And if it's passed if this issue is passed by voters on April 4th, we'd go up to 2.25% total going to the city, where everything above and beyond that 1.5 is going strictly to the police department, and the police are still using most of that remaining one. And the 0.5 is partitioned away for transportation only. It can't be used for police at all or anything else. But even then, so even if it passes, we're still looking at a rate that's lower than the city of Ozarks and the city of Republic. So they have gone back to their voters over the last couple of decades and asked for sales tax increases. And that's part of how they've been able to afford some of the nice things that they have in their communities, right?
Sure. Yeah. That's a great point, Ruben. And, you know, I think that just to kind of go back just for a second, what Chief was talking about earlier and you had mentioned, and because I get that question all the time, you know, as the city continues to grow at such a rapid rate, you should be able to afford all these things, right? But it really goes back to what you were saying about how sales tax rises as a growth, but it's not to the same level that we're having the demand on the services are rising at a much greater level. And you may ask, why is that? Well, it goes back to, a little bit about commercial growth and availability for people to eat and shop in Nixa. That's why we're always so vocal about shop here in Nixa, shop local, support your local business, because what we see happens is we're so close to Springfield. That's a benefit in one area because you can work in Nixa, you can work in Springfield and live in Nixa if you want, which is a great benefit for a lot of people. But also being so close, a lot of people tend to go to other communities like Springfield and do their shopping or do their eating at restaurants. And so although we're growing in population, the sales tax revenue isn't growing in the same proportion.
And we have a question here about, is the tax increase permanent? And if so, how would we spend the funds after the new building is paid off?
I can start with that.
Sure, go ahead.
So, yes, it's not a sunsetting tax. And, the question is why? Why not? And because, as I mentioned earlier, if we build a building, we're looking at potentially doing a 20-year bond. So we're talking about 20 years worth of growth. We're also looking at a bond payment for the next 20 years to be able to pay that police department off. But the second part of that is the additional officers and the operating expenses that are going to continue to go up over the next 20 years. If we did a sunsetting tax, let's say after 20 years and that went away, we'd be forced to be put in a position where we would have to lay officers off because that tax would then go away. We wouldn't be able to afford to keep the officers that we hired with that tax.
So it's the purpose if we have to lay off the officers, right?
Exactly right. So in 20 years, we anticipate, as mentioned earlier, the growth of the city's growth and population is going to continue. And so the need for additional officers and operational expenses is going to continue. So, yeah.
Will police officers get a pay raise if this is passed? I think there's a lot of officers waiting, pins and needles to know the answer to this question.
Well, I think the short answer to that is, well, it depends. We have a prioritization on this money, and I can tell you that one of the things that the mayor and the council has done over the years is that they have addressed our pay because they understand the realities of recruitment and retention. And so, are we the highest paid in the area? The answer is no. But are we the lowest? The answer is no. And what I would tell you is that with this funding, there is an opportunity to at least start looking at that. So if we want to become maybe more competitive with pay, or we want to offer a benefit that could really draw in that young recruit, we can do that.
Retention,
Yeah, absolutely. But in a scenario where we don't have that, those are certainly off the table.
It's one of those things where having this extra funding in place makes a pay raise possible, but it's still ultimately up to council, right?
Sure, absolutely.
In the budgeting process. Is there anything else the council would cut from the budget to afford more officers, or could cut from the budget to afford more officers in the building instead of asking for a tax increase? So is there fat that could be trimmed to pay for these things?
Yeah, I think it goes back to what I was addressing earlier, talking about earlier. We've done that over the last several years. Every year we go through the budget process. We look at to make sure that we're spending citizen tax dollars to the best of our ability. We're very frugal with that. We understand that is a huge responsibility for us, so we take it as such. And so yes, is there things that could be cut? I'm sure you could find things, but there's going to be.
Is it going to add up to an officer?
Right. It's not going to add up to an officer, and if it does, you're going to have, if you cut certain areas, you have to look at cutting services to get that done. And that's one thing that we try not to do, is cut the services that the public have come to expect, and that makes us such a great city and community to live in. So, as every budget, I think if we're honest with ourselves, there's dollars here or there, a little bit here or there, whether but there's also there's repercussions for that. Could you cut back a little bit on training in different areas? Could you cut, things like that? So, but I'll go back to what I said earlier. We're very frugal with our tax dollars that the community's entrusted us with, and we're going to continue to do that.
Chief, another question we get that kind of has to do with the money question is, could we be building a smaller or cheaper department headquarters that would be cheaper rather than doing the 3-story building that we've proposed?
Yeah, that's one of the things that we looked really hard at. For us, I would tell you that if you gave me my wand and I could wave it, and I could have anything I wanted. I would tell you, we probably wouldn't stay in the same footprint. We'd move to a different piece of property with a single story and the square footage that we need. But what's prohibitive about that dream? Well, land prices in Nixa are really high. And so we know that that's probably not going to be feasible because you're adding the price of the property onto the cost of the building. And I can tell you that, so we know that we're going to stay where we're at. But our unique position over there, we're dealing with a water retention issue, a basin, and frankly, the building that we have has, it's just not, we're not able to expand it. We've gone as far west as we can go, and we were told by, people who are engineers and architects that we can't go up. It's essentially a metal building, and so the possibility of just, building upward and, as a cost saving measure on the existing.
You'd have to tear it down to go
Yeah,
up.
it's just, I think it's at the end of its useful life. I've seen 2 expansions in my career here to that department. I can tell you, things like HVAC, when you start Frankensteining that stuff together, it can be a mess.
And we looked at the cost of doing a 2-story building headquarters, but the cost to add that 3rd story as a white box was not a lot more than
Oh,
the
yeah.
cost of the 2-story, right?
Yeah, when we were talking to the architects, they told us any building today will cost you less than building in the future. And so when you start thinking about that, you start really having to think about forward thinking and thinking about how are we going to leave this? And that's one of the things as a chief of police, you always want to come into a situation and you want to leave it better than you received it. And that's kind of my goal there. We white box and we build that, we build a 3-story building, and we have the square footage that we can grow into over time. We're not going to come back to the public and go, hey, can we get a little bit more money? Because now we decided that we only built for what we need today, and now we're outgrowing it again. And I just don't want to be in that position. I think it's very smart of us to be thinking forward, building out and then growing into it. You saw that with the school district. They did that with the high school. And I guarantee you, they're really glad they did that.
They saved a lot of money over time, yeah, because as they've grown over the last decade, they were able to just kind of move into that 3rd story, no problem.
Yep.
We've covered that one, and I'm going to do we're down to the last 2 questions that were submitted ahead of time, so we're starting to run out of questions. Last call, if you've got a question on social media, on Facebook, and you're watching right now, please put that in the comments. We'd love to get to it, and we're going to try to get these last 2, and we're going to try to cap this thing off here in the next few minutes. So this is a kind of a tough question, Jimmy. This is about, so the city asked for a 1-cent increase in November that would have paid for a parks facility as well as the police needs. And so a lot of folks are kind of maybe having that question of how is a half-cent not enough for the police department? Why are we having to ask for 3/4 for the police department?
Yeah. I think there was maybe a misconception on the first in the last ballot issue. I think there was a perception that it was going to be 50-50 for police and parks. It was never really intended to be 50-50 because, as I mentioned earlier, a half-cent just doesn't cover the costs of the building and the additional officers. The philosophy before was if we were to build the sports center that would take care of our needs for the parks department, that would then become self-sufficient. In essence, it would have paid for itself. And then the majority of that money would have been able to shift to the police department and be able to afford all the needs. So the long-term goal was for the police department to receive more than 50% of that sales tax. Again, to kind of rehash what I talked about earlier, the fact is, you add the additional officers, you're at least $1.3 million. Estimated bond payments, depending on bond rates and all those things, are around $1 million. Half a cent only brings in about $2 million. So those two together are more than $2 million. So half a cent was never going to cover all the costs. And so that's why we visited with council and said the least amount we can ask for and meet the needs is that 3/4 cent.
Do we have any other questions that are coming through Facebook? All right, then this is the last question, and this is another Jimmy question here. Unless you guys can think of something else we want to talk about. So after this question, we'll kind of we'll tag out here. But why not use ARPA money? The city got a little over $4 million. Is that right? From the ARPA, from the federal government. But we're not using that to add officers or to build this building.
It was closer to $5, between $4 and $5 million. It was closer to $5. We did receive ARPA funds, as most communities did, and that the council really wanted 2 things. One, council wanted to use that money for infrastructure needs, for long-term infrastructure needs. It's one of the things that they're considering using that money for. The other, and we also want to be able to leverage that money because, you know, as opportunities come down from the state or federal level, if those matching fund opportunities come down for infrastructure projects, they want to have that money available for that. But ultimately, I think one of the things that all the things that we talked about today is just how expensive it is to add additional officers and build a building. And ARPA funds was a one-shot injection of money. And so obviously that amount of money wasn't enough to build a police department. And it's not enough to hire those officers and maintain them year after year because there are deadlines on the ARPA funds. They have to be expended by a certain deadline. And so it's not like we could save that money and spread it out over the next 10 years to be able to pay for these things.
Not enough to build a building and not there long enough to be able to keep officers.
And then once that money's gone, it's gone.
Yeah.
There's no way if you hired those officers using the ARPA funds, there's no way to continue to pay those salaries, and you find yourself in a position of having to lay off officers.
It's a one-time thing, so it's kind of smarter to use it for one-time projects,
That's
like infrastructure things. Yeah. Okay. So last question we got. You did get a second question from Tony. He's asking, what about tax monies from marijuana sales? Could we do a marijuana sales tax to cover the cost of the police department? And I think that the answer to that is that we wouldn't have enough revenue from that to cover these things. It would create some revenue, but it wouldn't, if passed, but it wouldn't be enough to meet these needs, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it wouldn't be enough to cover the needs. You know, what that anticipated revenue might be. I think at this point it's still a guesstimate because, you know, we're waiting to see what those amount of sales are. But I know that based on our first estimates, they're not enough to hire all the additional officers, pay for a new building. You know, it might generate enough to hire one additional officer. You know, I think 2 would be stretching it. You know, but again, it's not going to bring in the amount of revenue to be able to meet all our needs.
We have one more question that's flying under the radar here. Coming hot off the press. Thank you, Macy. Is Republic, Missouri and Ozark sales tax higher due to public safety? And that's a question from Brandy. I don't really know how they're using their sales tax. I know the Republic has a lot of sales tax going to parks, right?
Yeah, they have some dedicated park taxes as well. But I honestly don't know the answer to that, exactly what they're utilizing all their funds for. You know, I know that
Well, they recently did pass a tax increase that did specifically, yes, every Republic that specifically supported their public safety.
Yeah, good point.
So, yeah, they took that step, and you know, I think you're seeing some good things happen over there.
Yeah.
And Ozark has been asking for these kinds of things and had some trouble.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that wraps up all the questions that folks have submitted. So if you have a question that we did not address, we've talked for almost an hour now. So hopefully we've covered all the bases. And if not, feel free to send us an email, cityhall@nixa.com. We'd be happy to read your questions and respond to those. Chief has responded to some. Jimmy has. I respond to some of those. We're kind of doing that as a team effort, trying to answer everybody's questions in the community so you guys can make an informed decision when you guys go to the ballot box on April 4th. And so that's the main thing, is we want to make sure that you're getting information. Remember, you can go to nixa.com/elections, and there's information there about this issue and about there's a mayoral race, and there's 4 city council seats that we're trying to fill in this upcoming election, as well as those 3 proposed updates to the city's home rule charter. And you can learn about all that stuff at nixa.com/elections. And with that, we're going to go ahead and sign off today. So thank you for watching, and I think we've got one last graphic we're going to leave you with. So remember to vote on April 4th. You know, our purpose of this is not to tell you how to vote, it's just to kind of give you all the facts so you can make an informed decision. And we hope you found this helpful. So thank you again for watching, and we'll see you guys around town. And we thank you for your time.